Hello and welcome to another episode of the Kalon S Rugby Podcast. Today we kick off a busy week by looking at the URC and looking at the four Irish provinces in particular. We have a very special Heineken Champions Cup, sorry, Investec Champions Cup or EPCR Champions Cup program coming early in the week, probably tomorrow, Monday, or whenever you get to hear this, it could already be up where we just sit down and look at the last 10 years of the EPCR. We also have a preview to the 2023-2024 Investing Champions Cup season. But before all that, we're going to look back on block one of the URC. Going to look at the four Irish provinces who have all got off to strong starts, all in the top eight. As things stand after 7 rounds. For those of you on podcast form, you can catch this on YouTube over at the KLN S Rugby podcast. We'll have a little bit of graphics, just something to keep an eye on. For those on YouTube, if you want to listen to this on the go, you can. You can head off. You can find the KLNS Rugby podcast on all good podcast platforms. But we will start things off firstly by looking at apologies, by looking at the league table, where as we can see, four Irish teams in the top eight. Leinster lead the way with 6 wins out of 7 and 29 points amassed so far. They're followed closely by Glasgow Warriors in second place. They're on 26, and the Bulls are on 25 points in third. Last year's winners, Munster, are in fourth place, despite only 4 wins, which is less than the two teams behind them. But those 4 wins is enough for fourth spot. Fifth place sees Edinburgh, sixth is Benetton, and seventh and eighth, rounding out the top eight so far, is Ulster and Connacht. Probably important to note it could come up at the end of the season. Number one, the top eight go into Europe next year, not top whatever plus Shield. And in the case of a tiebreaker, if two teams finish in the same amount of points, it will come down to games won. So, for instance, Munster on 4 wins have less than Glasgow, than the Bulls, than Edinburgh, and Benetton. So they need to finish on more points than those teams or just equal the same amount of wins. Those things can prove costly. It could have been the case last year for Munster had they beaten the Sharks, for instance, I think it was. But that is how it's shaping up so far. Four Irish in the top eight. You can't really ask for too much more. Glasgow and Edinburgh would be very happy with their start so far, having played. I think Glasgow played all four provinces and Edinburgh have played three so far. While the Bulls have made light work of teams at home, 274 points scored in their 7 games so far is it's really quite remarkable. Like running expansive rugby at its absolute finest down in Pretoria. And we will start tonight, this afternoon, this morning, whenever you're listening, by talking about the league leaders of Leinster. So, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can see I've done up a strength of schedule here. So, we have, for those on podcast form, we've got looking at the 7 games that Leinster have played. But beside it all, I've put down where each Irish province has played have finished after the 7 rounds. So, for instance, Leinster lost to Glasgow, who are in second place. And by virtue of a strength of schedule metric, one that is not algorithm led or not the most accurate in the world, we're just going to try and measure out what these kind of starts have been for the different teams. For Leinster to go to Glasgow and lose is not too bad. Now they were quite poor on that day. There's no doubt about that, but it's just something to look at, no doubt about it. So Leinster round one defeat 2 Glasgow Warriors. Things didn't look too well there. They really trounced in that game, but picked things up. 6 wins on the bounce since. At home to the Sharks, at home to Edinburgh, away at the Dragons, followed by home wins over Scarlets and Munster, which was in the Aviva Stadium, and then Connacht away. I feel like, as will be the case for patches of this season, you could probably discount the 2 games against the Welsh sides, the Dragons being the Dragons and the Scarlets, who rotated quite heavily um, for their trip to the RDS. We'll just look at the other 5 games. The starting game against Glasgow was a sloppy performance from Leinster, just outplayed, outfought. Glasgow have an incredible knack of winning cheap penalties, of dragging you into conceding 10 plus penalties in a game That proved costly for Leinster, but to concede 43 points to be cut open defensively was a hammer blow. Not something we're going to see too often in the Jacques Nienaber era. There's no doubt about that. But certainly a rough result to start the season. They did steady the ship against the Sharks in round two. As he said, 34-13 victors there. The Sharks haven't been great, but to be honest, it was one-way traffic for most of that game. Likewise, a week later, despite a late Edinburgh comeback, Leinster, again, at the RDS, quite solid at home. Edinburgh, on paper, it should be a tough game, but as we've seen in that game, they only really played in dribs and drabs, and 36-27 felt, for some people, a bit, a bit light on Edinburgh on the day. Dragons, easy win. Scarlets, easy win. And then the two Interpros that Leinster played. Now, I do believe Interpros are probably the toughest game you'll play when you're playing teams that are locked and loaded. Now, Connacht probably sacrificed a couple of starters for putting them on the bench and looking to finish strong. Munster were without, you know, 3, 4, 5 match day 23 players for that game, but Leinster doing enough to get the job done. Now, what you do see is, if you're watching on YouTube, so 25 points scored against Glasgow, very open game. 34 against the Sharks, 36 against Edinburgh, 33 against the Dragons, 54 against the Scarlets. But just 21 and 22 points respectively against Munster and Connacht. A lot of errors started to creep in for Leinster. A lot of handling errors. You do wonder if maybe their attention is shifted now that Jacques Nienaber's in the country, that maybe they've been looking at other things, and maybe just things like contact skills or just basic skills have taken a hit, because realistically, there's only a certain amount of hours in the week. And if you're going to try and hone in on something, you'll probably see another aspect of your game drop off. It could be really as simple as that. I mentioned in the Red Army pod after the Munster game that I felt that Leinster's errors were more blatant. They were forward passes. They were passes not going to hand, knock-ons. But we did see some of that again in the Connacht game, which is worrying. But again, I don't think it'll last too much longer. If it's still there in January, I'll be absolutely shocked, for instance, because fitness isn't an issue, skills isn't an issue, and they're going to be playing teams that they're going to be sweeping aside. Maybe not in the run to January, but in general, they will. And there's probably the two games I would dig deepest on. Excuse me, because that Munster game, really gnarly game that I agree with the likes of Bernard Jackman, who said that Munster probably not learn more from it, but be happier with it, just because they were without the likes of Peter O'Mahony, for instance. But Leinster, to the 4-1 on the points table, that was about fair. I think it's fair to say. But there was signs of sloppiness in that game that lingered, especially in the first half against Connacht. Connacht really should have been further in front, and then to slip behind, obviously recording this the day after the game, to slip behind the manner they did. We'll get into that later when we talk about Connacht, but some of it is just Leinster's ability to go from second to fourth or second to fifth gear. We've seen that for years. But at the same time, it does feel like Leinster really got out of jail there. Connacht butchering a line out, or if not two lineouts, laid on. Their set piece just kind of melted away. Defensively, they got sloppy, and Kieran Frawley finishes off a brilliant try to win it, but really felt like Connacht let one slip and Leinster pulled one out of the bag. And that's good for Leinster, because, like, are you going to learn more from a 54-5 win or a 24-22 away Interpro win? It's the second one, and they're the kind of games that we've looked at. Again, looking at it, those were markedly two of Leinster's harder games to have. Munster, who were in fourth place, Connacht, who were in eighth place. Connacht away, like, it's not like playing a mid-table team. It's like playing one of the best teams in the tournament. So I think you could almost mark that down as being a couple of ranks higher. The average place of teams Leinster have played so far is ninth. They've played 15th place Sharks, 16th place Dragons, and 13th place Scarlets, as well as four of the top eight to kind of swing the balance a little bit. But I think that Glasgow game, to lose away in Glasgow, that happens. You want to win all your home games. They've done that, and to sneaking away into Pro Connacht, I think that's something like 6 or 7 in a row now, is a really good result for them. There's no doubt about that. Apart to this, we'll look at the fixtures, then we'll look at kind of the performers that we've seen stand out, and then we'll look at any question marks. And for Leinster, the standout performers, I have them listed here: Jack Boyle, loosehead prop; Max Deegan, back row; Jamie Osborne, utility back, I suppose; Ben Murphy and Cormac Foley. I've done this a few times where I've doubled up against that in a minute. 2 scrum halves, both really good, and Kieran Frawley. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players there, most of which have played nearly every game. Jack Boyle went from, what did he, 2 Leinster caps, I think, at the start of the season, to playing like 4 of their first 5 or 5 of their first 6 games, and he's looked really comfortable. He's a very highly thought of prospect. He's abrasive. He carries really, really well, but scrummage as well. And Leinster scrum, it's not the most technically perfect scrum in the world. It's not the most powerful scrum in the world, but they get by on little idiosyncrasies. Look at Andrew Porter. He doesn't scrummage completely square, and he is a big loose head. Well, not massive in the world scheme of things, but in Irish context, he's a big loose head. But he has a formula that works, and Leinster are kind of like that, and you gotta respect that. Scrummaging isn't all about just being square and being powerful, and that's it. It's way more than that. And Boyle will probably be another who, listen, if he reaches Andrew Porter's levels, he'll be an absolutely amazing prop, like Porter is. But looked really good in the first few games. Max Deegan, I think Max Deegan has had a good maybe 2 seasons or that, but just by virtue of the fact that it's the Leinster back row where you have Doris van der Vlier, Conan, then the likes of Ryan Baird and Scott Penny, it's hard to break into it. Deegan has probably fallen into that middle tier of internationals who they might get the occasional call up when Ireland are down a few men, and he might get a few more caps in years to come. But he's going to be a really good provincial man as long as he stays at Leinster, and played 6 the other night. But I kind of talked about this before. I don't think him playing at 6 is a huge difference. Than when he's at 8. James Culhane has been at 8 a lot, and I really should have put him in there, and I do apologise. He's been very, very good as well. He has looked powerful. He's looked well capable of the level that he's at URC so far, and he's still only 21 years of age. It's great to see. Jamie Osborne and Kieran Frawley could have bunched those two together. Frawley played a lot of minutes at 15, Osborne mainly at 12, with a start on the wing last night against Connacht. And 2 lads who'd be looking to get into the Ireland squad when the Six Nations comes around, especially, Osborne looking at maybe a centre or an auxiliary back position. Kieran Frawley potentially as a 10. As if we haven't heard that conversation enough this week, only for him to be named a fullback and play well at fullback again, it should be said. But Osborne, is he a 12? Is he a winger? Is he a 13? I'm not really sure. He could be a fullback. I'm not really sure, but he's competent and he doesn't make a whole lot of mistakes. Got a huge left boot, tackles well, runs good lines, good player. If he was to start at 12 this week against La Rochelle, I'd have my concerns because, he's going up against Seanton Dunty, who's probably the second best 12 in world rugby, I think. But Osborne has been really good, and Frawley has deputised at fullback really, really well. Probably not his most natural position. We've heard him say he wants to play 10, has played a lot of 12, has been a fullback this season. But Ireland's depth of fullback is largely unproven insofar as Ireland haven't given much caps at fullback. Jordan Larmour was the guy, then it was Jacob Stockdale, and it's been Hugo Keenan ever since. With Michael Lowry got 2 caps, and Keenan and Jimmy O'Brien has gotten maybe 2 starts at fullback, and apart from that, it's been pretty much all Hugo Keenan. So the likes of Kieran Frawley, Jamie Osborne, Stuart Moore at Ulster, Shane Daly at Munster, these guys will look to put their hand up, but maybe Farrell will see Frawley as a potential backup 15, but it's hard to know. I don't have James Culhane mentioned. I should give him another shout out. For those on YouTube in case they forgot. And then Ben Murphy and Cormac Foley, both scrum halves, with Luke McGrath injured, they've had to do probably more heavy lifting than they would have previously, especially with Ross Byrne. I know he only took a knock last week, but he would have been out of action for a while with the Ireland squad. So these lads have had to step up and they've had to mature very, very quickly, and they have done. Thought Murphy did well last night against Connacht. Some would disagree. Thought Foley was very good off the bench and has had a good season. And with Jemison Gibson Park and Luke McGrath pushing on in age, it's no harm for Leinster to see scrum halves just kind of just show that they're ready for when the time comes, especially when you already have someone like Fintan Gunn, being talked about as knocking the door down already. There's good depth at scrum half for Leinster. Moving on, then we do have a few question marks. The first one for me is Jacques Nienaber. Like, will Leinster need time to adjust? Like, is he going to come in and say, "Well, I want you defending this way, and that's what we're going to work on"? And then, as I said before, that can sometimes have a knock-on effect in other parts of your games if you're focused on one major aspect like defense. Or will he just kind of implement it slowly? Ironically, he would probably be looking at implementing a rush defense, which is all about pace. So a slow bleed would be, mildly ironic, but it's certainly a question to see if there's two schools of thought here. If they take their time, you'd wonder, can they get to a place that come May and June, longer season this year, of course, will they be in a position where their defense is where Jacques wants it to be? But if they go quicker, they have games like La Rochelle, Sale, Munster, Ulster. In January, then they have Leicester and Stade Francais, or the other way around, Stade Francais, then Leicester. Not exactly games you want to be completely tweaking and changing for. And like, if you are going to try something in training, like new defensive model, if you're not implementing it in the game week, you're probably going to have some issues as well. So that's for Jacques and for Leo Cullen to decide upon. Like, Jacques Nienaber's defense is brilliant. There's no doubt about that. Defensive guru was brilliant at Munster as well. Was brilliant with South Africa. But will they need time to adjust? Is he, like, from what we've kind of not heard, but what we've kind of seen suggested is Nienaber will be all defense and Goodman will be all attack. Whereas before, Leo or Stuart Lancaster kind of shared a bit of the attacking role with Andrew Goodman. And then one thing that Stuart Lancaster did very, very well was selection. And it's not just him, it is Leo Cullen as well. But selection, it was a big part of his how he made Leinster into a more consistent team, because they could rotate 13, 14 players and look very cohesive. I feel like for a club side, if you're not cohesive, it's probably a sign of just too much chopping and changing more than anything. And I think for Leinster last night, like, some of those combinations hadn't played together. For instance, like, say, a Henshaw and Natai, you know. Um, so that's kind of not on them, but you have to find a balance. Your club side, Leinster's number one team, if for what they'll probably play next week, line out next week, is cohesive because they play together more often than not. But behind that, then, are they chopping and changing a bit too often? Is there as well a chance for the likes of maybe a Charlie Natai, a Kieran Frawley, a Jamie Osborne, even a James Culhan, or I suppose you'd probably have to say Joe McCarthy is on the outside looking in. Is there a chance for those lads to bolt into the first 23? Probably something we haven't seen a lot of from Leinster in the last 2 years, especially when they didn't use all their subs in the last two European finals. But as well as that, you are bringing back the Irish stars, and the reality is, because Ireland went so heavy on their category A tier one team, whatever you want to call it, those lads have amassed a lot of minutes. Hugo Keenan, James Ryan, Gary Ringrose, Andrew Porter, especially at prop, Josh van der Fleer, Caelan Doris, they have put up an awful lot of minutes so far. So heading into the winter months, how will we see those minutes managed? do they get Christmas off, for instance? But if they take Christmas off, they have to play Munster away and Ulster at home, I believe it is. They've obviously got their 4 European games. There's always a chance of injuries post, the season after a World Cup. There's always that because of high minutes played in the early points of the season. So that's something they're going to have to look at. I think they can chop and change to a certain degree, but when they go 13, 14 changes, that's when you would have more question marks about them. So for that Munster and Ulster in particular, I think if you had the likes of, I'm trying to think, maybe a Robbie Henshaw plays one of those games, Gary Ringrose plays one of those games, or maybe they play the same game, maybe play different games, I don't know, and so on and so forth. Like, even I would be in favor of maybe just giving Andrew Porter those 2-3 weeks off because he's playing at prop and he's going 70 plus minutes for Ireland when he's been there. He'll go 70 plus minutes for Leinster. It might be no harm just to give him the time off. Tyke Furlong maybe the same. James Ryan obviously had that knock, so probably not in the same boat. Van der Fleer, Doris, possibly as well. So big questions to be asked. And what goes alongside that when you talk about the Ireland part, you talk about the selection part, is life after Johnny Sexton and life after Stuart Lancaster. Where do Leinster go from here? They've 2 co-captains this year, which is probably the right decision in some ways, insofar as Johnny Sexton is a huge personality, a huge leader. You can't just replace that overnight. At the same time, am I a big fan of co-captains? Not really. I think if you're a leadership group there, whoever's named as captain, it doesn't really make a huge difference. But certainly their leadership group needs to step up now. I think you could raise questions about the NIQs as leaders, Nata Jenkins and Michael Alaalatoa. Even if someone like Alaalatoa is a Samoan captain, that doesn't mean he's a big voice in the Leinster dressing room, because every dressing room needs different types of leaders. And Alaalatoa strikes me as someone who might be of the consummate professional of a Pacific Island player, but maybe not the most vocal, maybe not the most hard nosed of leaders. That's probably something they'll look at. If it's believed they were sniffing around it at Jorge Snyman and Jean Klein in recent years, they would have fit that mold in terms of their leadership presence. But listen, it's up to James Ryan, Gary Ringrose, Tyke Furlong, Andrew Porter, Caelan Doris, Josh Van der Fleer, these guys to step up. They've had lots of minutes at international level. They've had lots of minutes at Leinster level. Step up and be leaders, hopefully. And like, realistically, at least one of those should be of a standard of being a good provincial captain. It's not, when you get into the business part of the year, yes, it's a very tough gig, but this part of the season, there's no reason why those lads can't step up, and I think they will. And obviously, after Stuart Lancaster, you're replacing a big leadership presence off the field coaching wise, but I think they'll be fine. They're bringing in Jacques Nienaber, who mightn't be the most, how do I put it? He mightn't be the most vocal of coaches, but he knows what he wants and he gets what he wants, and that's good to see. We will move on next to the reigning URC champions and Munster. So Munster started this season, I think they're in a happy enough spot. They're in 4th place. They've kind of apologies. I got a message there on my phone that kind of got me thinking. No, you got I think you got a good start out of Munster. Definitely a lot of ups and downs, a draw and 2 losses, but they've had a tough run. Like, I know the Stormers are listed there as being in 10th place, which they are, but like, I don't know if Munster, at least not until May, will they go on a run where they play as tough of games as Ulster and Ravenhill, the Stormers, Leinster and the Aviva, and Glasgow. Now, Glasgow may not have been great on Friday night, but that's really tough. So we'll start round 1. They swept aside the Sharks, bonus point victory there. Round 2, they went to Benetton and snuck a late draw. Round 3 took them to Cork. They swatted aside the Dragons. Then, as I mentioned, round 4 up in Ravenhill, 21-14 loss there. They beat the Stormers 10-3 at Thomond Park in round 5. Round 6 was that 21-16 defeat to Leinster in the Aviva. And a bonus point win over Glasgow and Musgrave Park on Friday night, 40 points to 29. Probably what's most impressive there is that Munster have taken something from every game. They got a try bonus point over the Sharks. They managed to sneak a draw against Benetton when it looked like they might even get a losing bonus point for parts of that game. Try bonus point win over the Dragons, as you'd expect. They got a losing bonus point from Ulster. Really should have got more, but that's for another day's conversation. They got the win over the Stormers. They got a losing bonus point from Leinster away, and they got a try bonus point from beating Glasgow. So like their 3 home games, sorry, 3 of their 4 home games, they've taken a try bonus point victory. I think that's a really good run. The Sharks have been poor again. The Dragons have been poor and are a poor side. But a draw against Benetton is no mean result. I think Benetton will beat at least one big team there this year. At least 1 or 2 more big teams there this year. They're very good at home. Ulster away, I know they just lost to Edinburgh, so it seems like numb words, but in terms of your differentials, to take a losing bonus point from Ulster is good, and that is enough. Take a losing bonus point from Leinster away is gaining a point on the chasing pack. And as well with beating Glasgow and getting the bonus point there is taking one. Now the only thing I will say there is we give Glasgow a try bonus point. All Maul tries just simply not good enough, but that'll have to be worked on. We'll touch on that a little bit later. The average position of the 7 teams Munster have played is 8th place. That is probably skewed by the Stormers. You're probably looking at a bit better if the Stormers were off to a faster start. And yeah, I think if you're looking at that, if you're in 4th place after 7 games where you've basically played top 8 sides, that's good. That's a good start, and especially when they got Peter Mahoney back. He's off after 40 minutes. Got Sean Plain back very late. Orchis Snayman has been playing. Joey Carberry got injured. Andrew Conway retired. They got a new centre partnership in Nankerville and Frisch. They've basically had no wingers left because Mike Haley, Patrick Campbell, and Liam Coombs are all injured. So Shane McCarthy's had to step up, and Sean O'Brien as well. But pretty happy so far with those first 7 games. There's things to work on, but we will get into that. Firstly, standout performers, and the very first name is probably the one that everyone wants me to talk about, and the second name is probably the other person everyone wants to talk about. Edwin Adogbo and Thomas Ahern. These guys look like they will be Munster's second rows for the next foreseeable future. Maybe not straight away with Tyke Byrne and Jean Klein still in the side, but boy, they look good. And even at that, let's not forget Thomas Ahern has played his last 2 games at number 6 and has looked brilliant. And I'll get into that in a minute. So, Adogbo, like, in terms of raw power, I touched on this. I was on the Harper and Rugby pod before the Leinster game, and I was asked kind of about him. Adogbo is remarkably more than what you see on the tin. He looks like a big, brutish second row. Well, he's more than that. He has got really soft hands. His ruck work is really, really good. Had some huge ruck involvements in games. He carries abrasive. He carries smartly. That's something I really like. Like I and George Lord's a player I come back to because he was so good at a young age. But one thing when he was kind of coming off the steep incline of form, a criticism I heard Rog, I think it was, say was, he carries at men, and it's like it's the biggest fault of the best and strongest players. They carry at men. He's like, sometimes you just need to remind them, yeah, it's great to win a collision, but if you run like to the space between 2 lads, get your hands free. You're getting over the gain line, you're creating opportunities, and it's just a mindset thing. Edwin Adogbo has that. Like, we've seen it in multiple games so far where he's carried right down the seam between 2 defenders, got his hands free, released an offload, or even if not, he's making good yardage. And with that power, with that line out ability, which is good. It's not fantastic. He's not a line out specialist, but it is good. Um, he just has a bit of everything. I would certainly be considering having him in the Ireland squad come February as a developmental player, as maybe an 18 player. Would certainly be interested in having him thereabouts. And it's not about who you drop. It's about getting a lad like that who has and this is the term that's been used about Joe McCarthy, but I think it's more true for Dogbo. He's got what we don't usually produce in Ireland in terms of an incredible size and almost an aura around it. Like he's a 20-year-old who the Stormers tried to target whenever he got his hands on the ball. Like that doesn't happen too often, especially at second row. And the man beside him is the guy that we all expected to be coming through. Thomas Hearn. Did we expect to see him as a six? It's something I actually thought about last year was, could we see him maybe move to six and kind of a Tyke Byrne role because he's not the biggest and we slimmed out, or not slimmed out. He's bulked up quite a lot in over the preseason. Boy, does he look good. One thing I've loved is his line at work is fantastic. Now, again, people could roll their eyes and say that Munster's maul was so poor on Friday night, you can't be praising it. But Ahern, his ball handling skills are just phenomenal. He's got great pace. He's brilliant through contact again. How did he stand out at six? I think it's more got to do with his explosiveness, especially when he holds that wide out position in attack. Like we've seen, I don't know who it was. I think it was Josh McKay. He may have bounced off for his second try. Just shrugged him to one side. Yes, I know it's a second row against a winger, but Ahern is getting so much power now. He's getting up to speed. Again, I would be considering having him in the Ireland squad for those very reasons. I think he just has that. That's something that we don't really produce. Like if you're looking at kind of lock flank hybrid players, we have Tyke Byrne, most obvious. We have Ryan Baird, and that's all that's in the Ireland squad really. And then you got the likes of Ahern. Ahern is probably more physically powerful than Baird. Maybe not as agile, but more physically powerful. Baird has not been tasked with calling lineouts really for Leinster. Ahern has done. That's not a slight on Baird. It's just something that you could look at. Ahern is probably better in the air. Baird is further along in his development, no doubt about it. But I don't think there's any harm in having both of them in an Ireland squad. Maybe Ahern gets in over Baird. Maybe Baird gets in over Ahern. For match day squads, but like we're in year one of a cycle, if you want to talk about cycles, and it's an Ireland squad who like we're pretty set as a team, so it's not all about giving minutes. But if you brought a Hearn in, I selfishly I'd only bring him in maybe for a week or two because Munster played the Crusaders the first week of the Six Nations, and this may hinder the selection of the likes of Adogbo and Ahern. The fact that Munster played the Crusaders and then they play Harlequins as well in kind of Six Nations period friendlies. We're gonna need to find a name for that. Spring friendlies, we'll call them. So that could hinder him, but I'd love to see him thereabouts. I think he could learn a lot as well. I mean, he has the likes of John Klein, Jorge Snyman, and Tyke Byrne to pick the brains of every week, and Peter O'Mahony if he becomes a back row option. So I think he's well set at Munster, but new environment never did anyone any harm. That's certainly the case for Jack Crowley, who looked like a talent at Munster. Always looked like a talent. Then he goes off to the Emerging Ireland tour. He goes out, he gets into an Ireland squad, and he never looks back. And the word I use, and if you listen to me on this podcast talk about Jack Crowley and Ireland and Munster, it's the Paul McGinley line of the pointy elbows. He just wants to push everyone out of his way to get to the top. He is. I didn't see too much of Jack at 10 last season, just the games that I got to versus the games he led at 10. But the Stormers game for me was fantastic. He was very good Friday night against Glasgow. But the Stormers game, where nothing is really going right. Munster is still trying to stay on schemes, stick to the script, but he showed a robustness because he was getting battered by the Stormers, but he also showed a confidence, like to be dropping back into the backfield and trying this wonderful variation of kicks, be it these kind of um uh back or front spinning kicks in behind, or be it 50-22 attempts, or he's just, kicking dead ducks into the air on a wet night and hoping they come down nicely, which they did once or twice and caused knock-ons. He's just done, he'd had everything that night. And his game management was a trope that was thrown out by one or two of the pundits during the World Cup, but he certainly has that. And it helps as well that he's got a esteemed signing that Munster brought in Alex Nankerville at 12. He has been brilliant for Munster, there's no doubt about it. He has, I think he has been really, really good. It's, how do I'm trying to put the right words into it, to be honest, but he's brought a power, he's brought an abrasiveness, and he's brought a willingness to adapt, a willingness to learn, a willingness to just get stuck in. Like the fact that he played straight away when he came down, which wasn't expected. Some of that is due to injuries and the likes, but looked really, really good straight away. And his partnership with Anton Frisch, who I also have mentioned here, I think it's just taken off quicker than Frisch and Fekitoa did, but it's just really taken off. They complement each other nicely. Nankerville more powerful. Frisch just times his runs really well, times his defensive reads very well. And I like both of them as a centre pairing. I've also included two back three players as kind of the the standouts, I think you can say. And that is Shane Daly and Calvin Nash. Daly has been asked to go back to fullback. I think he's a very good fullback. I think he's probably more suited to the wing when he's at Munster. But again, really, really good at fullback. Defensively solid, brilliant kicking game. Chooses his lines of running really, really nicely. Um, I couldn't really say much more about him after skipping ahead there. Sorry. Calvin Nash again, like he just reminds me of an Andrew Conway type. He refuses to die in contact, picks great running lines, runs with great venom and power, and defensively, as strong as you'll see. Very impressive. Maybe not, impactful in every game, but has had moments of brilliance in them as well. Where's the question marks then? I think you're looking at set piece. Like, are these frailties that we're seeing at scrum and at maul, and even at lineout? The scrum, some of that is power, some of that is just likes of Stephen Archer is pushing on an age, and he's just hanging on in there after a brilliant season last year. But we're not conceding a whole lot of penalties. We're not winning a whole lot. It's probably a bigger issue. The lineout overcomplicated at times. Throwing has been awry. Timings have been off. They've kind of, the more simplistic we've gone at line out time, the more successful our line out has been. We've almost overcomplicated it for ourselves, never mind the opposition. And then the maul just simply was not good enough last week. There's no denying that. Having someone like Tyburn in the team when the maul goes that badly, and he's a good maul defender, it's a strange one. But you hope it's just a blip, as I said. I have to take a drink. A lot of talking. Number 10 then is there's a dependency on Jack Crowley now with Joey Carberry out injured. Anthony, I've heard from Munster was that Tony Butler, that they were not going to make him play 20 games this season. Just was not on the radar. It's something that other provinces would laugh at, but he's year 2 in the academy. His physical development, we don't know where he's at, and because of that, we're probably going to ask Jack Crowley to get through big, big minutes. And it's definitely a question mark. Can he go the distance every week? Maybe not every week. He won't play the two He won't play both Christmas Interpros, probably play against Leinster and sit out the Connacht game. But yeah, definitely a lack of obvious depth with Joey Carberry out injured and Ben Healy have been moved on. And finally, power deficiency. Like, is it something that's going to prove costly for Munster? We've said it before. When you take Sean Plain out of the team, when you take maybe Tyke Byrne out of the team, one of their, if you take maybe Kilcoyne, for instance, it's not the most powerful side. We don't have elite, powerful front rowers. Maybe Ollie Jagger could be that. We'll wait and see. Time will tell. We have probably two elite, powerful second rows, one of which is in a long-term injury. Tyke Byrne punches above his weight, no doubt. And our back rows are not the most powerful men in the world, bar say Gavin Coombs. So it could be something that proves costly again. Depends on who Munster play in Europe. Depends on who Munster, what kind of game they get drawn into. Against Leinster, I did think it was costly because there was times where they just started losing collisions and started going backwards, even if they were threatening on the first few phases. It was power that caught up with them. It wasn't the attacking shape. It wasn't anything like that. I think it was just power, just 1v1. If you're going backwards, you're going backwards. Next up, it is Connacht, who are the third ranked Irish side so far. No, Connacht the fourth ranked Irish side so far. Apologies. But we'll touch on them next. Um, so there is Connacht's run of games. They started with 3 straight home games, but not 3 easy home games. The Ospreys 34-26 win there. Glasgow 34-26 win again. Not something you see too often. And Ulster 22-20 win in that one. But like you look at their easy games, like they've had Glasgow at home. Glasgow weren't great on the day. Glasgow were in second place. They had Ulster, who were in seventh. They had Edinburgh, who were in fifth. They had to go away to them. They had to go away to the Bulls in Pretoria. Got trounced, but that's going to happen to a lot of good teams this year. Who were in third, and they had Leinster at home. Yes, it was rotated Leinster, but Leinster are top of the table for a reason. In terms of which games I'd look at, I thought the Ospreys win was very impressive because their attack just straight out the gate looked really, really good that day. Defensively, a bit eerie. Same thing again for the Glasgow game. The Ulster game, they kind of tidied it up a small bit. Big second half to win that. Edinburgh game, I thought that was one they probably let slip, but then they come back, they beat the Sharks away from home. You think everything's okay. The Bulls game, kind of expected them to lose that, but the Leinster game, to lose in the fashion they did, to lose to a last second try is rough. It's a body blow to Connacht, and even like they've got a short week before they play Bordeaux in Europe. That is a big ask. If Bordeaux come locked and loaded with Damien Penaud and Matthew Jalibert and Maxime Lussou and Yoram Mofana and Biel Biare, like that backline, they could easily rack up 4 tries against Connacht. That's a huge concern. Huge concern for me. I think if Connacht keep it tight and maybe they get the conditions right, they could be fine, but it's going to be a big ask in that one. Average rank of teams they've played is 6th, which I think, they've had Glasgow, Ulster, Edinburgh, Bulls, Leinster. Yeah, very, very, very tough games. Have they had their tougher games at home? They have, because they've had Glasgow, Ulster, and Leinster all at home, but 2 wins out of 3 there isn't too bad. You don't want to lose your home games, but losing a home game to Leinster isn't going to cost you dearly, especially when you're going to the Sharks. If you're taking a win in South Africa, losing to Leinster at home doesn't look too bad, especially when they're in close succession to each other. Their standouts, I think most of these really pick themselves. Carl Ford is the main one that I want to put front and center because he's been absolutely fantastic. He's going to put pressure on the coaches when the time comes, because when Bundy Aki gets back, if Bundy hits his World Cup form, you can't leave him out. But where do you put Carl Ford? Do you look at him as a 13? Probably not. I think he's very good 12. I thought he played well against Leinster. I thought his handling in the lead up to the Keelan Blade try was fantastic. He was stumbling and hits the pass, and then, he hits the ground with a tackle to boot. And I just think he's such a competent 12. Another guy I'd like to see in the Ireland squad. Not 100% sure we will see it. Joe Joyce is next. I mean, for a big second row, a bit of a journeyman second row, he was signed from Bristol. He probably didn't have that high of expectations, but he's looked really abrasive early doors for them. Been very happy with him. Keelan Blade and JJ Hanrahan, probably their first choice halfback pairing as things stand. Blade for me has been, I think both players have been a bit of a roller coaster. When it's gone right for both of them, they've looked absolutely fantastic. No doubting that. But there has been a lot of errors. And for Connacht, when you're playing fast and loose, there has to be an acceptance that you will make probably an above average amount of errors because of the way that they play. In terms of handling errors and just basic, pass not going to hand, knock-ons, forcing the initiative a bit too much and running into danger. But it can just be a bit too frantic at times. We've seen that last night. Just needs a little bit more composure from time to time and to not be as wasteful with the ball. Every time. It's probably the only slide I have, but I'd be happier to see that they're dying by the sword that they're living with, but a concern nonetheless. Brian Ralston then has played, I think he started all 7 games between the wing and centres, looked really, really good. And Jim McGallen, very good power winger who scores more than his fair share of tries. Been happy with him. Both of them have looked sharp to start the season. They've Matt Hansen back. So at least one of those, well, they could both start with Ralston at 13 on Friday night, but you could see one of them losing a couple of minutes there with Mac back. Question marks then, and I've already started the first one. Just give me a second as I take a drink. First one is the 10-12 conundrum. It's Jack versus JJ. It's Call Forward versus Bundy. Jack Carty is their captain, and he is well suited to what Connacht are trying to do. But JJ is the form choice at the moment. I think they could go horses for courses there. Call Forward against Bundy when the time comes is going to be a really interesting one. There's a good chance we don't see Bundy in many Connacht games this side of the Six Nations anyway. So that the can could be kicked down the road for them. But I do wonder which way they're going to go there. Back row balance, again, that's something we've talked about with Connacht before. They went with Janssen at 8 last night with Prendergast and Hurley Langton on the flanks. I think their best back row is Seamus Hurley Langton, Conor Oliver, and Keane Prendergast. But with Janssen, definitely brings them a bit of power. Sean O'Brien, the same, the new signing from Leinster. It's hard to know because power is a thing for Connacht that is a slight issue. They don't have 8 of the biggest forwards in the league, no doubt about that. But the balance has looked off at times when they've kind of skewed. I think actually when Conor Oliver doesn't play the bat is when the balance looks worse. I don't know why that is. There's probably people better vested to explain that, but certainly something I'd like to see them just hone in and know what their starting back row is, or at least have something that you can kind of go, well, when they're playing a more powerful team, they'll go with this, or when they're playing most other teams, they go with this at least. Away form, their away form isn't bad. Don't get me wrong, it's not bad. They won the Sharks, but they've had great home comforts this year. That was their first loss at home this calendar year, the one to Leinster, which is great. But that does mean you need to be capitalizing on some away games, which they haven't done in recent seasons at times. Like we've seen them slip up, be it in Wales or in Italy against Benetton or in Scotland. So certainly need to double down there. They've already lost Edinburgh on the road. The Bulls game, you'd give them a pass for. I'm just trying to look back. And then the Sharks, obviously, they won, but you want to see Connacht probably winning their 2 away games in Wales, for instance, just to kind of consolidate what they've already done at home. Finally, it's time to look at Ulster, and this is Oh boy, is there a lot to talk about here. First and foremost, they are in seventh place after 7 games. Their strength of schedule average is sixth, so they've certainly had a tough start to the season. But started with Zebra, got out of jail there away from home. No, there's no doubts there. Beat the Bulls at home. That's always a good win. Um, they lost to Connacht in the Sports Ground. No harm in that. Beat Munster at home. Beat the Lions at home in a stop-start performance. Then to lose their last 2 games. We'll get into this a bit later on. To lose to Glasgow away and lose to Edinburgh at home. The Glasgow away game you wouldn't mind, but they only played about 15 minutes worth of rugby, which is not good. And the Edinburgh game, they got 2 points out of that game, but God, it wasn't great. It really wasn't great from an Ulster perspective. It was like Edinburgh were just the better team. And Edinburgh are not a team who travels very well. I think that's their first win in Ireland since 2019 or something like that. I think that could have been during the World Cup, if memory serves. Like Ulster's toughest games of Bulls, they've had them at home, bet them. Munster, they had them at home, bet them. Glasgow, they had them away, lost. Edinburgh, they had at home, they lost. You don't like to see. And then the Connacht game away from home, you wouldn't mind that. Like, I mean, yes, Connacht are in eighth place. Maybe they should have won, but they did essentially throw that game in some way. Sorry, they didn't throw a game. That's the wrong words entirely. Don't quote me on that. They targeted the Munster game the week after because it was in Ravenhill and it was the one they needed to win. They did, but they'll feel like they let one slip. I think they'll feel like they let 2 games slip there. The Connacht game because they were in the lead, and the Edinburgh game because they just didn't really show up for large passages. For that to happen 2 weeks in a row is worrying because, as we'll get to in a minute, Ulster had a tendency last year as well where things are going swimmingly. They have 2 poor performances back to back or 3 poor performances back to back to back. And then the wheels kind of fall off for a while and they kind of have to rebuild while it's still moving. And the URC does not allow for finding your feet in the middle of the season unless you've got games like, say, a Zebra or the Lions at home or a Welsh side at home. They still have to play all 4 Welsh sides, for instance. But two losses from 2 against the 2 Scottish is not ideal. It's definitely not ideal for them. Standout performance. I only have 4. Probably could have got 5 or 6 to be fair, but 4 stood out for me. Jacob Stockdale started the season brilliantly. 5 tries in his first 4 games of the season. He just bounced right back into the swing of things. There's always going to be question marks about his ball handling and his defense, but I mean, if Jacob gets back to his attacking output that we know he can get to, then he's surely in with a shout with Ireland. But the only thing is, the Ulster attack has looked meh. It's shown glimpses of looking sharp, but has also shown passages of looking a bit blunt. Dave Ewers is the bludgeon option signing, but he's looked impressive for a man who's played probably over 300 games already in his career. He doesn't look like slowing down just yet, and it's looked good. Jake Flannery finally got a couple of games of 10. Now, unfortunately, he got injured in the warm up against Glasgow and looks set to be out for a couple of weeks. But he got the keys to the car and he has driven it really smoothly. Will Ulster back him when he comes back? I wouldn't hold out too much hope, to be honest. A lot of question marks hang over that, but I think he could be a difference maker. We don't know for certain. I'm not saying he is, but he could be in a way that Billy Burns probably isn't, but you know what you're getting from him. It's do you go safe or not? And James McNabney, big fan of him at Ireland under 20 level. I think he's a very complete player. Dave McCann is the guy I should have put in there. The fact that he's injured probably made me forget, but Dave McCann and James McNabney, powerful, high workload, um, young, but look very assured at this level. McCann finally getting a proper run of games before the injury, and McNabney in his first season both look really, really impressive. And I think there's a good chance McNabney and McCann are there 6 and 8 in years to come, to be honest. Finally, before we wrap things up, we have question marks about Ulster. Firstly, well, two of these are kind of intangible. Well, they're all intangibles in some regard. Leadership pressure. I do have a feeling that they're still reliant on Ian Henderson and Rob Herring in terms of leaders on the pitch. It is a young squad, so you're going to have that from time to time, but I feel like you can tell the difference when Henderson and Herring are on the pitch. Brilliant leaders, like they could be international captains. I recognize that, but you can always tell when they're there. That Munster game was a good example. Those two came off the bench and they helped drag Ulster over the line. Tom Stewart is still young, for instance. Kieran Treadwell, probably not the biggest leader in the group. Back row, I'm not sure they have an obvious candidate. Half back, I'm not sure they have an obvious candidate. Stuart McCluskey leads by doing. He's not the most vocal person in the world. He'll say that himself. So definitely, it's something I'd like to see looked at. Is leaders, because you can never have too many. You can never have too. Well, you can. You could have all 40 players in your leadership group, but that would just be silly. But you can never have too many. Realistically. Then the next one, I've just said stale game. I think it's the comments from Dan McFarlane last night, I think are egregious. I don't think you can really comprehend what the thought process behind it was. The Like I said here, his words and his tactics look to have run its course. The line I used last night was, I think the hairdryer has just ran out of power. He's done this a few times where he's tried to tell the players, listen, the standards aren't good enough. You're not doing well enough. You know, I want you to do better. And that's well and good and it'll work a few times, but it has its limit. It eventually reaches a crescendo. And a line that I've used before that I've heard about Dan is, well, Ulster aren't going to sack him, but, you know, like the fact that they were kind of supposedly let him talk to Leicester about that gig last year make you think that, I think if he left, they wouldn't mind, but he still has another season and a half left in his contract. That doesn't expire until the end of the 2024-2025 season. Oh, there's questions to be asked. And then even his assistant coaches, like they're not free from blame either. Like I think but they play a style of game that is not suited to them, to be honest. They have some powerful forwards. Like they've signed Kitchoff. Tom O'Toole is a powerful ball carrying prop. Ian Henderson, Kieran Treadwell, but both of them very rarely start in the same game. Davy URC they've signed. I just think they're going for this brash and this powerful game when, like, get McCluskey on tip-on passes to Stuart Moore and Jacob Stockdale running off his shoulder, get Balogun off the wing as well. Like, show something in attack that isn't the same old story. Like we seen in that Munster game for the Stockdale try off the cross kick. They ran them left and right. They opened up the space. Burns put on a crossfield kick. That's how they should be playing week in, week out. Not just going to the bludgeon every time. And I think it's just run its course at this stage for Ulster. We're waiting to see, but I haven't seen anything that says they're going to evolve to a significant level this year to change how last season ended, which was, again, a bit of a stale end to the season. And the costly slip-ups also cost them last year. Like, yes, they did finish in second place, but like last year, they had games, went on a run either side of Christmas where everything just starts crumbling and it just starts falling down very quickly. And it was a major dip. And I think the last two games could lead to the same thing. Now, I think they'll probably just get past Bath just about this weekend. It won't be an easy task at all. Bath away from home at the Rec are a tough beat, especially this season with Johan van Graan and with Finn and the likes. But I think they can't afford another slide. Like they're already in seventh place, which is worse off than they were this time last year. And they will have tough games like going to South Africa. They have to go to Thomond Park. They have to go to the RDS. They'll have tougher games to come. They really can't afford to regress. And that is all we have time for. That's the 4 provinces covered. Ran on a bit long. Apologies for that, but 4 Irish provinces and Block 1 finished, surmised, looked at, whatever way you want to frame it. I'm happy with the provinces. Yes, there's questions to be asked and there's room for improvement. There always is. But 4 Irish sides in the top 8 after the first block of fixtures, and all of whom had some level of tough games, is is pretty decent. Thanks to everyone on YouTube for watching, for everyone on podcast form for tuning in. If you are in podcast form, Kalon S Rugby podcast on YouTube. If you want to just catch some of the graphics I threw up there, like the schedule or the talking points. And if you're on YouTube, I'll have these all linked, but Kalon S Rugby podcast, wherever you get your podcast. As I said, we will be back this week with 2 EPCR Investec Champions Cup related podcasts. One, panel discussion looking at the 10 as we head into the 10th season of the EPCR era and ask whether it has been a failed experiment. Really looking forward to that one. Really esteemed panel. I think you will enjoy it. And then a solo pod to preview the Champions Cup with, as always, an extra eye on the Irish provinces. So thank you very, very much for watching and for listening. I'll have all my links down below. I'm on Blue Sky now at Kalon S Rugby. I'm on Instagram at Kalon S Rugby for more of the news and to get notified when the podcasts and maybe a few articles, hopefully, if I get time, the far side of Christmas, when they go up. So Blue Sky, Instagram, Twitter, as always, Kalon S Rugby podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube. Thank you so, so much for tuning in. For me, until next time, take it easy.